Em nome do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Projeto e Patrimônio da Faculdade de Arquitetura e
On
Urbanismo,
behalf of the architecture program of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, I welcome all of you to one more roundtable of the Transnational Dialogue cycle for 2022. This session has simultaneous interpreting. If you want to watch it in English or Spanish, please do click the globe at the bottom of the screen and select your language of choice. We have a series of roundtables promoted by the New Heritage Approaches team to promote the mutual listening and development of communities and the exchange of knowledge and experiences in preserving and conserving the cultural and natural heritage as part of the activities of our World Heritage Movement. Throughout 2022, we have a number of meetings and discussions. We did this in June 2021, and the playlist can be accessed via YouTube. The 2022 dialogue aims at celebrating the centenary, the 100 years of the World Heritage, and focusing on Article 5, that focuses on the need of natural and cultural heritage having a function on the daily lives of communities. We want to provoke this debate under a more egalitarian perspective, inclusive perspective, entailing multiple narratives and different cultural supports in its several contexts to try and build a less segregated world together in a less hegemonic model considered to be heritage. The roundtables in 2022 focus on three day-to-day forces: art, food, and housing, with bets to incorporate and change the day-to-day lives of those communities and vice versa, questioning the ideology of speeches and colonial practices. Today's table, called City, Food, and Heritage, the second of the cycle, aims at identifying the possible alignments between food and city heritages with useful exchanges. The choice of ingredients, the preparation of foods, they are connected to the livelihood of social groups and their living territories. Each region has their own secrets and ways to do things. And the knowledge of feeding is intangible assets of peoples and has to be acknowledged by society and due bodies. Today's debate is inserted in the discussions of the new heritages, and it is promoted by the professional master and the heritage project of FAO UFRJ, the group of research of the Fine Arts School, and the Council of Architecture and Urbanism of the City of Rio de Janeiro, the support of Brazil Architects Institute, the study group for research in policies and territory of the Geography Department of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, the International Council of Architects, the Brazilian Institute of Architects, the Center of Cultural Heritage that had the support of the Cultural Heritage Center of the Chile Catholic University, and the Latin American Forum of Environmental Sciences. I pass the floor to Rubens de Andrade and Noemi Barradas, and also to Margaret Liu. They coordinate the post-graduation program for greetings on behalf of the organizing institutions. Next, we'll be hearing the greeting of Francisco Mandarim, one of the founders of our movement. Unfortunately, he had something came up at the last minute, but he did send a message. Rubens, over to you. Thank you, Monica Bahia, for the introduction and for talking about the proposal of the 2022 sessions. We were working together with Margaret, Noemia, and we understand the discussion becomes more and more important when we bring researchers, professors together, and also people that are committed to this discussion. So I'm very satisfied to be here. I greet all those who are with us today to not only hear what the researchers have to say, but most of all, broaden this network. What we seek with this relationship of knowledge and the players we're going to have today on the three sessions is to broaden the possibility of discussion and topics that are critical in our city's day-to-day life. So it is important to say, it is important to use this milestone as a spotlight so we can focus on the discussion and broaden that, publishing this through YouTube and all the material we've been using to broaden this discussion. All the team behind the project, not only with what we could bring from the last discussion, but from today's discussion, it's going to be pretty fruitful. I wish you all a great session, a successful presentation, and the project wants to welcome you. The project belongs to all of us.
Bom dia a todos. Faço as palavras do Rubens, as palavras do Conselho de Arquitetura. Estou aqui representando o Conselho de Arquitetura.
I represent the Architecture Council, and I want to second what Rubens just said. We are part of this network of discussion, which is pretty important. It is a modern, meaningful discussion, and it has to be discussed. We had deep discussions last year, and this year we have very important topics to discuss. It is a very special table today, so I want to thank for the participation of the speakers, especially Rubens and Monica. We want each session to be better and better. Thank you. And I wish all of you a great session. Margaret, I think you're on mute. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, my connection is kind of unstable here. First of all, I'd like to greet Monia's initiative. This very nice work that is being performed. The first table was interesting, and we're discussing the connections that we make when it comes to impact on the cities. There are important discussions that we have to have. But as well said by Rubens, I'd like to thank for the initiative, wish a good table to all of you, great discussions, and well, have a good session, everyone. Thank you, Margaret. Landy, can you pass the video? Can you play the video with Francisco's message, please?
Querida Mônica e queridos colegas, bom dia a todos.
Dear Monica and dear colleagues, good morning, everyone.
Antes de mais nada, quero parabenizar a Mônica e todos
Before
os
anything, I'd like to
organizadores e
congratulate
participantes
Monica
deste seminário de discussão
and
sobre
all
o
of
tema
you for
cidade,
this
comida
discussion
e
seminar
patrimônio.
on the
Eu
topic
apresento hoje
city,
aqui o nosso
food and
patrimônio mundial,
heritage.
Our World Heritage, a organização da sociedade civil que promove uma
The
mudança na
the
forma
civil
como
society
o
organization
patrimônio mundial em particular
discusses the
são
world
geridos
heritage
e utilizados.
and how they are managed
Como a
and
Mônica já
used.
explicou, promovemos em
As Monica has
2021
explained,
uma série de debates sobre as
we're going to
questões
have a
mais
number of
importantes do
debates
patrimônio. E esse seminário de hoje
on
é uma continuação
important
desse grande trabalho que tem visto a
heritage
organização de 134
symbols. This
eventos de discussão.
organization
O tema que
has
hoje debatem me
134
parece
discussion
muito
events.
importante para avançar com a compreensão
This discussion
do
is very
que é o
important to advance on
patrimônio
the
hoje
understanding
nas
of what
cidades e nas grandes
heritage
áreas
is for
metropolitanas.
cities
Acho que a
and big metropolitan
divisão entre o
areas.
patrimônio tangível e
The division
intangível
between
e imaterial tem caráter
tangible
artificial.
and
E penso
intangible
que o seu seminário sirva
heritage is critical.
precisamente para o demonstrar. Na verdade, é necessário redescobrir as tradições, nesse caso,
We'll have to
da
discover
comida,
the
da cozinha,
traditions,
por vezes seculares, das diferentes populações das nossas
the
cidades e
secular
metrópoles, para
behaviors of
as
different
tornar
populations as well.
parte do patrimônio reconhecido
And we have
da
to be
identidade
part
da
of
gente.
the
Nosso
heritage.
patrimônio mundial, a nossa organização,
Our
está
world
muito interessada no tema da
heritage
inovação no
is very
patrimônio.
interested in
Isso
the
também
innovation
está
topic.
no centro do seu debate de hoje. O
And
que
this
as
is going to
novas
be the
populações
core of today's
metropolitanas
debate.
consideram e produzem como patrimônio. E isso também é um dos temas do programa Eritópolis,
That's one of
que
the
lançamos
topics
há
of
cerca
the
de 2
Erythropolis program,
anos e que será apresentado como um evento na Conferência
which is going
Mundial
to be
CUT
presented as an
no
event
final
at the
desse
World
mês.
Conference.
Obrigado e bom trabalho, querida
Thank
Mônica
you,
e caros colegas. É bom
and
ver que
I
o
wish you
patrimônio
all a
desperta
fruitful
tanto interesse
day.
e que uma grande coalição está sendo formada no mundo para renovar
I
o
want to
seu
greet this big
significado.
coalition that
Bom
is being
trabalho a todos.
formed worldwide. Thank you. Thank you, Francesco, for sending this message. I hope you can hear us later. I'm going to pass the floor to Sonia Rampin. She's going to be our moderator for today's session. She's a sociologist. She studies PhD on environment and sustainable heritage through the Minas Gerais Federal University. She's a master in education through São Paulo's Unicamp. She's a specialist in rural sociology, also through São Paulo's Unicamp, and on public policies for social protection and development through Brasilia's ENAP. She's a civil servant of IFAN, and she's a professor of operational master and member of E-Commerce Brazil, where she coordinates the scientific committee of interpretation of heritage. Sonia, welcome. Good morning, Monica. Good morning, everyone. I'm greatly satisfied for being invited to this important debate. After all, food is the first cultural manifestation. Language and food. That's what identifies a social group. I want to congratulate the organization of the event. I'm gonna try and share my screen, then we're gonna get started. Can you see my screen? The World Heritage Convention that is celebrated this year, it turns 50 this year. It focuses on Article 5, as Monica said. It is a document written in 1972, so on a specific social and historic context. And of course, after that, many things have changed. And using what Professor Francesco said, it's very important for us to pay attention to the fact that what heritage is today and the role of state, of institutions, of government institutions, in the policies of heritage preservation. So the member states of the pact should assign a social function to the cultural and natural heritage for collective life and integrate protections to planning programs. And I want to call attention to the way this is put in the convention. the state should assign a function to the cultural heritage. So then we ask ourselves, cultural heritage today brings an understanding of what we specialists and researchers actually call. It is given by the very social groups. So, of course, the convention needs to be read and reread on the context that we are living today in the present moment. So, we have to question what is the role of the state in preserving the heritage processes. So, understanding heritage as the life of those social groups, for us to understand the discussion, it is important to think that agents, researchers, the government needs to need to dedicate to the processes of dispute, a horizontal perspective to build knowledge of heritage identification in such a way that it is collective, including the dialogue. In, so it includes the cooperation of knowledges. So this process, well, I'm talking about Brazil here, but for all states, all countries that are influenced by the international documents at UNESCO, it is important to pay attention to the complexity of values assigned to the heritage. And those values beyond traditional values that we already know, landscape, historic values, the ones that are more commonly used in the process, they are assigned by social groups. And those groups are within a social relation context. They have different representation of this group's lives. So the big point is how to access the social valoration and by analyzing Article 216 of the Federal Constitution. It says that this legal milestone moves the cultural valuing matrix, but the elements are the agents of identification and therefore of value assignment to those memory, identity, impressions to all the groups of Brazilian society. So it is very important to understand this movement. Constitution brings not only the broadening of the heritage concept, with the intangible and knowledge and forms of expression, but also this identification matrix and focuses on the importance, not only the genesis of our country, but what happens today as well. And Piano publishes has a 1991 publication of the affective values. Some people call it social values. Those are the ones that imply subjective relations with spaces, structures, objects, materiality, and immateriality. They talk about this space dimension that regards the belonging. That's the man, social being, are unable to live out of this space time access, the social and historic context. Of course, the food is just to provoke, considering the topic, and that the food not only they have knowledge, but it's a way of expressing, they tell the lives of the territories. This is a green corn and rib. This is from the São Paulo interior, from my city. It is a this is a collective thing, and this represents a social and affective relationship of the territory. And this regards social relations of the territory, and this also includes the subjective relation and affective relationship as well. And also, in this perspective, a reflection from the Australian anthropologist Lauren Smith. She talks about heritage as a resource to defend different ways of being and existing in the world. It's a process of engagement, an act of communication, and an act of signification for the present. So it is a way for us to defend the way of memory to heritage and the wish of future for social groups. So those perspectives bring a number of issues for us. What kind of perspective, what kind of world views is that based upon? Who are the production agents of this heritage? How can we reconcile the different knowledges without hierarchizing them on a very horizontal perspective of knowledge? Does our methodology account for the access to affective and social valuing of heritage? And another reflection by Professor Boaventura de Souza Santos is that the processes of visibility require a translation that allows for creating this reciprocity of intelligibility that recovers knowledge, practices of social groups, that capitalism and colonization, historically and sociologically, put in the position of object, of raw material of the knowledge. So this all brings us, the agents of heritage, specialists, the challenge of taking over a political role when it comes to dialogues with those narratives. The heritage today informs a wish of future, a wish of society, a wish of models of possibilities of social life. So heritage as a practice in and for the present with this future orienting engagement for different societies and bringing this focus to social mobilization groups and those interests and identifications of the heritage many times go against a speech, as Laura Jean says. We don't have time to discuss that, but a speech that is authorized by the heritage formed from international conventions and the more Eurocentric perspective of the heritage. And these discourses are counter discourses, counter speeches, and they allow for a form of experience and heritage. Quickly, those speeches are from a very nice project that was made in the central region of São Paulo called Participative Inventory of the Minhocão. It is a bridge, and they wanted to see what the heritage was on a context of gentrification that is happening in the city center through a project in the Costa Silva bridge. So you can YouTube that or Google that, I should say. You can Google Inventário Participativo do Minhocão. And the heritage is used as a resource, identifying poor locals of the city center, the LGBTQIA plus community, and identified cultural references. Some of them
Algunas de esas están ahí en el inventario.
here and georeferenced a dossier made by the Paulista Network. It shows that the cultural references appear in the places of celebrations and places of encounters and as a means of expression with the Quajubá vocabulary, which is here to the left. This is LGBTQIA plus vocabulary as a form of expression. To the right, to have a drag queen performance that was used as a knowledge of the group. So you can understand more in the inventory. So I wanted to illustrate that when you open yourself for possibilities of dispute in the social groups, what we do have is a surprise on the broadening of the concept of cultural heritage. So what we use is not the solution, is not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it has been an educational tool that simulates this social participation is free to use. It has suggestions of heritage category, but in the inventory itself, we say that it is totally flexible. We can create others, we cannot use them. And it simulates for communities and groups to then define value the references. So it helps, it contributes to the access of affective values and incorporation of knowledges. And then understand the community as a protagonist to assess, write, and define what heritage is. There are multiple possibilities. We have several examples of use within institutional layer out of indigenous perspectives, and brings up a possibility of tools to identify the heritage. And to wrap up, I want to mention Professor Varini says that the shared inventory is indeed the process of using products, pictures, images, but before anything, it is a pedagogy. So it aims at being born in a territory for an image of common heritage, because it thinks the heritage as an access of local development through their cultural references. That's going to be all just to start our conversation. Today we have Gabriela. She was going to bring up a participative heritage example with me, and we can move on with the presentations. Thank you. That is correct. If you will introduce them, okay? So let's start with Juliana Rampim Florencio. She's my daughter, and I'm thrilled to be on the first table with her. She's an educator in the human social areas since 2014. She's a philosopher. She's a master and PhD student of history at the Federal University of Brasilia. She writes for the 15.47 magazine on food and culture since December 2020. Juliana, you have 15 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you. Good morning. All of you, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you, World Heritage, for having me. And I want to thank all of those who are watching our talks. It is a great pleasure to talk about a topic that is so dear to all of us and to which I dedicate my career and research. I'll be sharing my presentation with you today. Just 1 second.
Bom, meu nome é Juliana Rampim Florencio.
My name is Juliana Rampim Florencio. I research. If you can just put it on full screen, Juliana. Is it not? No, it's not. It might take a while because it's already on full screen for me.
Vai, Lange.
Você tem
Lange
que
pode dar uma
compartilhar.
dica para ela, que tem que sair e entrar de novo.
Yeah, you
Não,
have to leave and then come back in. No, she has to share the screen. Now, Juliana. This presentation is a result of two research papers. Currently, the one from my doctor's thesis, which is almost at its end. 1 year to go to finish my research. I'm going to comment a bit about the hybrid relations in terms of food practices in the city and cultural heritage. The title is Eating and Cooking in Cities. Before I talk about the case study, part of my references theoretical and methodological references, that is, they help to understand the way I understand heritage and food. One of the main thinkers, Massimo Montanari, an Italian historian, he talks about food as a cultural perspective. These are recent publications, and this quote is from him, which says, exactly as language, cuisine contains and expresses the culture of those who practice it. It holds traditions and group identities. Thus, it constitutes an extraordinary vehicle for self-representation and communication. It is not only a cultural identity instrument, but it may be the first way to get in touch with diverse cultures. This way, we are able to understand that food is a set of human beings' choices. We we don't eat just because of the nutritional value to keep alive. We choose what we eat according to tastes, availability, how the food is prepared, ingredients that are available in certain regions. This this configures cultural and eating practices, both in the way the food is prepared as well as eaten. Thus, all relations around food carry a lot of symbolic values which characterize our multiple identities. This way, we are able to understand very clearly that food is a cultural form of expression. I'd also like to talk about the hybridism, if you will, aspect, the hybrid aspect. It's the way I believe that we this has to do with daily routines and also relations, yes, between people, right? Cultural hybridism is a concept which is present in the works of many authors, also Stuart Hall and Nestor Canclini, especially, and they don't deal specifically with food, but they deal with culture. Stuart Hall, in his very well known book about the diaspora, where he talks about the different ways of survival in the UK after the Afro Caribbean immigration into the country, and how this culture is not a negotiation and transformation exchange. He feels that he doesn't feel either at home or displaced. He feels part of many contexts. So, based on that, if we join that with case studies, we are able to understand how food is organized territorially nowadays. Conclini, when he talks about the hybrid uh, um, cultures, he talks about the specific territories, which I'll go into as I speak. This is a small explanation of how a city has to be understood as territory. According to geographer Santos, say that it's an area full of case studies expressed by the subjects. The food is part of the culture and the expression of these peoples. A city's territory is subjected to these same transformations and negotiations. So the words I believe that hybridism, quote unquote, elucidates when we talk about food: transformation, translation, reinvention, adequacy, suppression, addition, adaptation, and coexistence. The keywords. Those are my two case studies, both in urban areas, urban territories. The first one is the result of my master's degree that dissertation. There is the street fair of the TV tower in Brasilia and also in Bom Retiro in São Paulo. So I couldn't go on about both of them. So I'm going to talk about the TV Tower street fair. It's in Brasilia. It's very peculiar. The Tower Street Fair is dead in the town center of Brasilia on the monumental axis, which is like the body of the airplane if you look at Brasilia from above, and it is very, very central, literally as well. It is easily accessed. It's near the bus terminal, it's near the hotel sectors where the tourists obviously stay, and it has been reset, reconfigured spatially in relation to how it was conceived. This fair was very organic in terms of spatial organization. The stands were distributed more organically than a project by the government of the federal district was established to organize this fair in the way it still stands, as well as local arts and other things that are shown and sold within the fair. There is a food square. So everything to do with food was centralized, the, um, alluding to shopping centers. It has its food halls with tables, and the food is exposed, exhibited around these tables. This is all in the tower fair. The dishes are usually ready. We don't usually find anything to cook other food. This is has to do with the other fair. So in the Brasilia fair, this is food from many states of Brazil. We have kilo food, which you pay for what you eat. You have to weigh it. There is fast food, locally, as it were, locally exhibited. My second case study is Bom Retiro neighborhood in São Paulo City. Bom Retiro is well known and understood for being very diverse because it has welcomed many scores of immigrants from the 19th century, Italian, Portuguese. Then from the 20th century, we have a great Jewish um, immigration, mainly from Eastern Europe and Poland, then Korean, South Koreans, Greek, Armenian, Syrian, and more recently, from 2000, we have a big Bolivian contingent. In Bom Retiro, there are restaurants which still work. There are some restaurant facades which have been extinguished, but they're still there as a memory monument, if you will. This first slide, is the TV tower in Brasilia fair. I took these pictures during my research in 2018. In the first one, you can see the sizes of the pastries or pastel. I have the small, large, and extra large size of the savory. We have a barbecue stand. The third picture shows the food hall, if you will, with the stands around it. We have one stand from Belém in the state of Pará, selling food from Pará, and some sweets from the state of Bahia, in addition to other states. This is an example into which I'll go into a bit more detail, which is acarajé food. This is Ana, who sells acarajé, a typical food from Bahia. All photos, interviews were authorized by her. We have a few elements which I believe strongly show cultural hybridism. The first one is acarajé on a dish. For those of you who don't know acarajé is like a little cake made of beans fried in dendê oil, very local from the city of Salvador. Strong connection to local religion, and this dish is considered a typical dish of Bahia. It is very much related to origin and tradition. And I can state here, in terms of hybridism, is exactly this transformation. I fight a bit the idea of origin, when I defend, this idea of defending purity and nothing that has not transformed. So here we have an acarajé on a dish. This is not the way it was commonly served. It used to be commonly served. It is kind of set up in order to facilitate consumption within this fair. You can find it in other places like this as well. There is a knife and fork, which is new. So a transformation has taken place in order to facilitate consumption. I also analyze the civilization process of the ethnicities. I also talk about how there is a certain behavioral hierarchy on consuming food with a knife and fork as compared to eating with your hands. This is adaptation, pure and simple. It has to do with the consumer's choice, the type of sale that has to be made, the way food is solved, and the transformation of adaptation. The second picture, they didn't have a dish, so it had to be through a photo. This this is acarajé served on a sushi dish, just like we found in Japanese food restaurants. This to me is a clear example of the hybridism process. As Anna says, it's to be consumed collectively. There are more um, cakes, more shrimps. It can be sold in bigger portions. And it uses this sushi dish, which is a total innovation. There is no direct relationship which we would find, typically associated to acarajé. This is the Anna. This is Anna showing the cakes, acarajé cake raw mass which she's holding. In the slide before, we also see this space here, which is very hybrid and transforming, because one of the identities found in the people with whom I talked is that it has a lot of typical products. For example, pastel, the product on the top left, they are sold in a stand called Minas Train, Minas Gerais is well known for its cheeses. But when I spoke to the stand owner, she's not from Minas Gerais. Neither is anyone who worked there actually on the stand. So there is a flexibility both for in terms of consumption, of course, and for the sale to be facilitated. So there is an awareness of this necessary transformation. The barbecue stand, I think it was called the Cowboy King um, stand. The owners were not from the state of Rio Grande do Sul. So this shows the diversity and multiplicity of the environment, which is the food hall. In the borough of Bom Retiro, I don't have many examples here to show because of our time restraints, but if anyone is interested, I can give you the references and tell you what I found, etc. These references were taken from the INRC, which is a national inventory of cultural references. It was made by IPHAN, the Natural Cultural Entity. It's not a participating inventory for communities. There is a mediation. It can be from an organization, a university. Bom Retiro was done with a few students and São Paulo University professors, and these are the main references. It is very participative, this environment. It considers people mainly. Given limitations, it was very participative. So, in the conversations and interviews with the people of Bom Retiro, some of the cultural references vis a vis food, which I believe to be interest for our hybridism, are this bar, Falafito, with a Syrian owner. And at the beginning, she only sold falafel, chickpea cakes, but with over time she had to increase her menu with ready dishes. It's a very Brazilian concept of lunchtime dishes, very common in São Paulo. People, rush in from work to have a quick meal. There are many Brazilian elements, such as beans and rice, which I think was just eaten throughout the whole of Brazil, chicken, steak, cucumber, tomato, and the French fry sanctuary, which may seem strange. We talk about cultural transformation, right? It's very contemporary, but it is exactly this tradition and innovation conviviality group. It's a small restaurant which only sold French fries, very large portions of them, and the local students used to eat there a lot. So it has come up as a very interesting, important cultural reference. Down below, we have a Korean dish. It doesn't have a description actually. So it's a Korean dish at this restaurant, but it is not described for us. This is quotation by Chu and Kim from the Korean Association, saying that food is the greatest thermometer to measure the degree of immigrant nationality or their descendants. This, when we talk about the purity, um, the people want to feel through eating, if you will, there is, of course, a preservation of this nationality. But hybridism shows exactly the opposite, that not only is it necessary, but it's something that happens organically, that foods must transform, the way they are prepared also transform, they must adapt to local ingredients. I know I'm running out of time. I'm almost there. Just two more slides. This is a quotation by Massimo Montanari that I like very much. We see Anna's hand there preparing a acarajé on the bottom right. Cultural identities are not contained in the genetic heritage of a society, but frequently, incessantly, they are changed and redefined, adapting to always new situations determined by contact with cultures and different cultures and identity. Confrontation with others or in the presence of others, this allows us not just to evaluate but create our own identity. Identities, however, therefore, do not exist without cultural exchange, and protecting cultural biodiversity does not mean to close in each identity in a silo, but to connect them. Massimo Montanari in Food as Culture. Although I had to speak quite quickly, I'd like to thank all those who accompanied us here today. I'm available here if you have any questions. The last sentence by Virginia Woolf in her book, which liberally translated is A Roof of Your Own. It is not about food specifically, this quotation, but it says, with human structure being what it is, heart, body, and brain all mixed and not contained within separate compartments. You cannot think well, love well, sleep well if you have not dined well. So we need to talk about food security, valuing food. I think this sentence, therefore, this quotation is very, very um, pertinent. So thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you, Juliana. Now we move on to our next speaker, Loreto Sanchez, a social uh, works in the area of publicity, involved in many NGOs, and she works with also with connection to the environment. She is a specialist in territorial development, and she works with, sorry, her sound fluctuated there, communication competencies. She promotes the meetings between communities and institutions. She loves cultural diversity of peoples and the fantastic ritual of local cuisine. She is the founder of Fundación Rondon, focused on local diversification and identification, and they are present in many areas of their country, of her country, Chile, right? Loretta is from Chile. She also works with management with private and state entities. She has a master's degree from RINISP and the School of Economics from the Culture and Catholic University of Peru. She also works for the National Culture and Arts Council, where she devised the manual for the implementation of programs for local development with artistic and cultural elements. Welcome, Loreto. You have 15 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all very much. Thank you for your invitation. I'm very surprised. An affectionate good morning to you. I'm very surprised by the audience and what was said for this table. I'd like to thank Umberto Rono from the Catholic University of Chile, with whom we worked within the pandemic dynamics, if you will, and within the context of the pandemic in relation to cuisine and cultural elements of the territory. Our foundation in Chile has worked for 10 years with territories, and we have been able to identify, with a lot of surprise and very happy to do so, that people and local actors that live in communities carry out a permanent practice with regard to cultural and material heritage. This is a surprise to us to discover as professionals and heritage managers, to realize how in their traditional practices we see that heritage is very much alive and present. In terms of methodology, I'd like to share with you the following case. It has a lot to these food, gastronomic or food struggles to include communities and seek many different elements part of the territory, but also for local and regional development, which allow for the communication between the private and public worlds. I will share my screen with you now. Right. Can you see? Tell me if you can see, okay? As I had said, what we have done in the last few years is working on this collaborative design with communities different from uh, local organizations in order to design strategies to show these food routes, gastronomic routes, if you will, to bet on the value of heritage as a diffusion of heritage and also reach new audiences, in order for audiences not to see heritage as something you only see in museums. So based on this, I'd like to start off with collaborative initiatives and connected to the international scenario. In the territories, when we connect to these communities, we have always used sources and resources related to a territory. We recognize many sceneries, colors, geography, climate, nature, which determine how um, farming takes place, fishing, cattle raising is carried out by the communities that live in this territory, and are the people who determine the kind of cuisine and ingredients and the types of preparation carried out by the many communities. We have In terms of cultural heritage, what we do is to survey uh, immaterial culture we recognize, we acknowledge in the territorial areas, regional geographic elements, art, hieroglyphs, and we also have recipes shown from grandmothers coming down from grandparents, grandparents as well, grandfathers, older people who are working with heritage transformation. So collaboratively, we talk to these people intensely and cook with them, cook with these local actors. We design these routes which allow to connect heritage to the live, more traditional, more live aspects in the lives of these people. The most important element within this scenario, we are very happy to work with the communities for them to discover themselves as local authors and discover that they are part of maintaining and disseminating cultural, material, and heritage elements. They are local heritage, and they are the ones who start off and could be involved in many value adding dynamics. Working with, uh, we have technical roundtables, methodology workshops, which allow to identify objective images. We have identified how these food routes, from collaboration till social collaborations, which are active in these territories. A food route, a gastronomic route, allows to incentivize national local production, which have been left behind and very ill treated with the new mass consumption behaviors, right? So this allows us to rescue, retrieve trans tradition, and we also have touristic experiences, which where people visit local artisans, fishers, cooks, who are all part of this complete chain in the gastronomic routes. This allows us to study the heritage of this territory, to know how where the people come from, where and how the foods are and were prepared, and magically we are able to taste this story and experience this heritage in a different meaning, if you will. So all this allows us to connect in practice recipes and cultural and material aspects with these peoples, these areas, these artifacts, to build a history based on these experiences. So we have a gastronomical route. We are able to walk this route and understand which could be the institutions or actors in activity in this territory, which could add to this proposal and to conserve these elements. And based on that, we could communicate with local authorities and carry out active management with regard to traditional cooking in indigenous communities, for example, in the north of Chile. It's very difficult to talk with these communities because they don't really want to talk to us, and there are sanitary challenges. But with regard to the methodology, development methodology, we soldier on, and we have identified gaps within the communities, and we have been able to articulate with communities and local actors to devise action plans which allow to resolve or mitigate some of the points which are constantly struggling, and avoid cultural and natural heritage at a local level can be a development element. Of course, when we mix and articulate objectives with these challenges, both different peoples and actors in these territories start to work together towards common development and organizations and routes can give more autonomous examples, not as a tourist route or tourist experiences, but these visits, if you will, show us education dissemination routes. So, moving on, in the full cycle from the construction of this route, we identify some inputs, natural cultural assets, translation, traditional cuisine productions, and how the products are transformed, how they are sold, traded, and we identify communication spaces. Communication also allows us to identify new audiences, better communicate with the state and companies in some territories, part of the social responsibility policies and entrepreneurial policies. I don't know if you can see, this is very small, but in terms of inputs, we can learn about the original products and those who were introduced latterly. In terms of natural and cultural assets, we can identify the cultural landscape, biodiversities, archaeological spaces, rituals, practice, cosmovision. With regard to production, we also contemplate the experience in the gastronomic route is preparation, planting, cooking and conserving these products, and also conservation of the seeds. As I said, with regard to cuisine, we have ingredients, preparation techniques, dishes, and different preparations, a, a culinary grammar, if you will, cooking rules, the way to live, to share this cuisine. We have symbolism and beliefs. And this is probably the most important element when you build a route and a narration, which is to add different actors together towards this dissemination and the management of a route with these characteristics. With regard to transformation, we also work with the identification of the preservation and conservation elements in order to generate products with added value. Indigenous communities nowadays in our country have major production in terms of better flavors, better smells, the better way to impregnate kitchens and recipes not present throughout the country. So this patrimonial practice obliges us to add values to this kind of production. With regard to trade, we identify markets, traditions, and the more traditional practices by the different communities. Even so, sometimes there are fairs which are weekly, some are annually, and some are food fairs per se, and they always obey a calendar. So much so that these gastronomic groups carry values vis-a-vis the territories and strategies. This way, we are finding ways to show these territories in a very complete way, where local actors and producers are the essential elements for development and the agents of change, who, in addition to this, may hold all the information and all the baggage with regard to the cultural and heritage of an area. They can magically and affectionately go beyond, also very tastefully, go beyond just showing the territory in a bland way. These experiences are very enriching, and we focus we pay attention to local actors and authors. We have worked a lot with the identification of different asset identification. There is also the objective of being able to sustain this process in the medium and long term, developing leadership and social emotional capability, if you will. We use local governance in order to generate instances for better production, better trade, which are in permanent tension vis-a-vis communication media, for example. There are massive attempts to go against tradition, and youths, for example, the communities in many Chilean territories, at least in Chile, we stimulate youths to move from the cities to the countryside, from countryside to the cities, abandoning traditional consumption. In the last stage of this work process, in order to enable these routes, this had to do with the identification of new audiences to connect social organizations, which can be groups of neighbors, sporting association, cultural associations, theater groups. This is very diverse in essence. Although the vinculation with state institutions um, is not so present, we try to obtain support as well as improve understanding and a more sensitive understanding with regard to cultural and material heritage and how they are inserted into local dynamics in terms of development. On the other hand, it's vinculation and communication with companies which are enabled and foment some of these activities associated to sustainable development, but are very distant from each heritage concept. Heritage can be somewhat, shall we say, not very concrete. I think this is a magic word for some institutions, but more strictly speaking, it's a way of being and doing and coexisting with the effect of traditional cuisine process. This element allows us to identify and acknowledge the ways people lived for thousands of years, the communities, in dealing with climate, water. Nowadays, with all this water crisis we have throughout the world, and how to better condition and use resources. People are farming on rooftops now. There are products which, even though farmed in this quote unquote artificial way, we have a lot of tasty products resulting from this. You must come to our country to taste it. This dish is called ceviche, which is typical of our country. We share this with the Peruvian coast communities. It's a mixture of different fish and other ingredients which enable it, give it the flavor. And it has a completely different touch with regard to other preparations, be they from the north or the south of the country. But I believe that what most matters in this preparation is how the people who fish prepared the dish, how they affectionately told us how they prepared the dish. They got up early to prepare the dish according to the characteristics. This preparation is energizing and gives us flavors which are mouthwatering. I just like to share this with you. Our team on this gastronomic route, this allowed us to propose a work dynamics so that the private and public systems in the country can understand from the grassroots how cultural heritage and material heritage is an effect. It's a development factor, and it's very much alive, and it's very dynamic. We, as South American countries, based on this, could generate a very important development advantages, comparatively speaking, um, meeting the needs of the dynamics and individual needs of each community. That is what I wanted to share with you today with regard to this event, a gastronomic route showing how we carry out this connection, always through participation, territorial focus, with a co-responsibility for communities to be self-sufficient and yes, sustain themselves over time and promote better public-private partnerships, not in a business sense. So this is our web page of our foundation, so we can be connected. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope to be able to share more with you eventually. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Loreto, for sharing. We now move on to our next speaker, Tihui Campos from Mexico, who is a PhD in Latin American Studies, a professor at the UNAM and Sor Juana Claustro University. She works as a civil servant in food heritage and cultural heritage, tangible and intangible, in Mexico. She has taken part in many articles and books on interculturality, food governance. She's a member of a coffee cooperative and a counselor for many countryside organizations. Tihu, you have 15 minutes. Good morning. It's quite early here in Mexico. It's an honor to be here in this space for dialogue. I'm very grateful to people for you being here today, I should say. I don't have a presentation, I have a dialogue here. These are something for us to reflect on, always respecting the time limits given us. So based on the information we have here, my reflections are to do with curing cities based on knowledge and countryside knowledge in order to value the importance of indigenous countryside Mexican culinary heritage. And I'd like to reflect also on the major problems we come against in this terms of what to do and follow up horizontally heritage protection and culminating with an experience based on the last experience with the last government. We had an examination. Part of the idea for this um, exam or competition for people to send in their recipes, we had over 700 of them sent in. Well, modern Mexico is built on 68 Afro descendant and indigenous peoples. The literal example of Mexico City is this imponent cathedral, which is under the ruins of Pendochita. We have major buildings, gigantic buildings built by local immigrants from different regions, all of them with their own culture, food, cuisine. They have transformed the way we connect in the cities. Cities such as Cancun, which is the Maya region of our country, in that city there are over 38 national immigrant groups and other Central American groups who have built the major hotels, but always accompanied by what they plant, what they eat, cultural practices. This allowed us not just to strengthen our food identities as well as our knowledge and heritage. We also have a major problem here, which is food racism. We eat less and less tortillas and beans, pumpkin. As you know, and if you don't know, in Mexico, these foods, amupa, these foods sustain our culture. This has sustained us during crises and pandemics. The reflection of MUPA, um, cultural food representations in Mexico, show how we plant, sow, eat what we used to feed our stomachs, hearts, and dreams. If you go to a private or public construction and the builders, men or women, because we do have women building cities as well, the ones selling these foods from a certain region of the country that can only be obtained there. If you reach a region, amarejito, which is like a Mexican food based on a Haka base, you know that you can only get that there. Feeding collectively gives us a teaching of community, as our friend showed us before. This strengthens our identities. It's a fallacy to say that in fallacy there's just one Mexican cuisine. Why do I say that? Because based on the inclusion of Mexico in UNESCO's heritage list, what was served, not to many, there's a lot of criticism that this list only served for major tourism to strengthen their relationship with food. It seems to me that Mexicans, we still eat moles every day, and it's not true we eat the same thing every day. We have territorial identity, which has allowed us to be recognized as having these foods, or to be recognized as heritage. I don't know if you're aware, the base of our food is corn. In more Mexico, we eat almost 300 kilograms, different kinds of frijoles, tortillas, and other foods, corn-based. I haven't had breakfast yet. I'm hungry. Don't want to keep talking about these foods here, but our food, this declaration served to homogenize our practices. In Mexico, this wealth that we are 68 indigenous peoples and Afro Mexican peoples, where each person calls corn a different way. There are, just like many foods represent the way they represent the world, we cannot explain the world without mentioning what we eat and how we relate to it, and we organize to respond to these needs. I'm going to tell you a story now, an anecdote. Based on this pandemic, which caused many difficulties here in Mexico, the answer is the same: to know our foods and to ask about the origin of what we eat. It's part of our health as well. But what do we talk about when we're talking about food culture? Not only vis-a-vis heritage. Heritage is very important to us as a preparation strategy, but talking about food culture allows us to strengthen heritage culture. Food comprises a complex system vis-a-vis biodiversity, environments, history, and cultures of the groups that live and develop within these many territorial contexts. Knowledge of flora and fauna, their cycles, their reproductive cycles, also the best seasons for harvesting, consumption, language, production, preparation, the way of consumption, and discarding elements, everything that happens around these processes. That is why food is considered an essential element. I'm going to give you a very clear example. The science culture shows very clearly the relationships of people and their identities. Also, it's also romantic when we show how we eat and how we well consume. The people that consume and the agricultural practices offered us by the cities, there is food in the major urban centers. All that symbolizes what? Modernity, to eat beans, tortilla, pumpkin. That stigmatizes you as somebody who is backward, not modern. So there is no status involved there. We call that food racism, which affords greater privilege of one group over the other. I'm going to tell you a few um, mottos here. I hope you understand because they're very local. One of them that says, if you eat too many beans, there's a very racist motto that says, if you eat too many beans, you'll forget to speak English. You must always have a blackie within uh, on rice. So national food is identified as practices by somebody who is not incorporated to urban lives. So within these exclusion practices, they not only involve identity, but also health and our daily dishes, since corn, beans, and all products which historically have accompanied us throughout our root as a humanity, because we have lost the ability to value them, and we don't have time to prepare them properly, because we do not want to be associated to being Hicks, Indians, countrymen, Afro Americans in my case, because we do not want to be stigmatized because we consume these foods, and we are thus dissociated from our food heritage. So the dangers with regard to the outside world is great, but the internal dangers does not allow us to strengthen this participative work if we do not also focus on an internal struggle, striving and fighting against this racism. If practices have been imposed on us and other cultural consumption which have affected us, Mexico is ranked number one as the country with greater child obesity in the world. It's the greatest Coca Cola consumer in the world as a country. It's very dangerous to be ashamed to consume what our emotional and family heritage has shown us. So this forbids us from, prevents us from consuming these foods. We are undergoing a sanitary emergency here in Mexico with the sanitary obesity problem. As our one poet says, we are what we eat. In major cities, we have this urgent job to disassemble food racism. And from the protection of heritage, we must build inventories of this knowledge, these recipes. When I worked for the federal government, we assembled a group called What Does the Motherland Taste Like? We, in the middle of the pandemic, trying to formulate a national inventory of knowledge for regional practices. We invited people from all over the country to take part in this effort and this competition. We asked people to work with regional elements to devise a traditional community recipe. We received over 700 recipes in over 25 indigenous languages from the furthest regions of the country, which allowed us as a government to form this inventory of groups directly by the hands of people who cook these foods. And let me tell you, it's no surprise, but the main winners were those who cooked with beans, pumpkin, corn, and other traditional foods. And why do we need this heritage for? We need to build livable lives, but as well as living well, where we are implied in our daily practices, we need to deassemble and destroy this racism in order to continue building. And what is destroying this racism but disseminating our traditional knowledge and practices? Obviously, the search for this heritage is not a work of the past. We must do this today in order to see how we do it best, to be country folk, to eat with our memories based on the country we are. And we also have to think locally, of course. That is our struggle. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Tihui, for sharing with us. Now we move on to our next speaker, Ana Saraiva from Portugal. She is a PhD in anthropology, specializing in policies and culture and museology images, master's degree in museology from the Universidade Nova from Lisbon, the Social and Human Sciences School. She is an investigator from the Center in Anthropology Investigation. She takes part in investigation and patrimonial valuing projects, many publications and participation in scientific meetings. She programmed and directed the Ouren Museum, where she was the leader of the culture division in the municipalities of Ouren and Leiria. She is an anthropologist, general director of National Heritage. Welcome. Thank you all very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for this challenging invitation. I've learned a lot from my colleague presenters. Thank you very much for your speeches. I'm also grateful for to those who brought me here today. I'm just going to show you very briefly. I'm going to show you a few identity images vis-a-vis some identity processes related a bit to the Mediterranean identity as its participation in UNESCO's cultural heritage inventory.
Lande, você pode dar acesso para a Ana conseguir compartilhar? Já
está
indo.
sim, penso que já está.
I think I'm already sharing, says Anna. There we are. Is that full screen? Well, Anna, sorry to interrupt, says Monica. You are not on full screen. Why don't you share again? Then you can share from your screen. Then it will be easier for you to share via full screen. Now share your screen, please. Then you include it in your presentation.
Continua a não estar.
Yeah, it's still not showing to you, is it? Says Anna. Now requesting help from technical sector. Yeah, there we are. Full screen. Thank you, Andy. Well, so I'm going to talk. My talk is divided into three. First of all, it talks about the Mediterranean diet as an immaterial UNESCO cultural heritage. Then the patrimonialization of Mediterranean diet in Portugal, some of the benefits, also some risks and some gaps. And finally, I show you a brief approach for a case study which was carried out in France and Portugal, where very briefly we approach some transnational situations, which will show you, showing the trajectory, country, house, and food. In 2000, Anna has frozen. Uh, well, a study was carried out to study traditional Portuguese cuisine. In 2008, Portugal was included in Convention of 2003, the Immaterial Cultural Heritage. Portugal was listed in the representative list of immaterial cultural list. The municipality of Tavira in southern Portugal was the area which is close to the mountains and the sea, hence its choice. This, this inclusion included other countries from the Mediterranean: Greece, Cyprus, Croatia, Morocco, Spain, and France. UNESCO also used a cultural element, but also this was used as a lifestyle which to show the world. We, the intercultural dialogue and the transmission, oh, she's broken up again. Their entry was kind of a materialization of the need to include Portugal, which had existed for some time, and globalization contributed a lot to this. And there was a certain hegemony also in terms of the social aspects. Rural communities had a small participation and was seen as lesser, as it were. Food practices and life and culture practices were shown, and they were very much disseminated, so much so that on one side there was a difficulty to create a more uniform image of the Mediterranean diet. On the other hand, for each country, they showed the way they dealt with this diet, as it were, showing their territorial immateriality and cultural contexts. So, this was an interesting process. And the patrimonialization showed that there was a lot of identity negotiation involved. In urban centers and other peripheral Portuguese territories, there is a lot of identity vis-a-vis food, in a nutshell. The Mediterranean diet's inclusion in Portugal was very good to create an idea of citizenship about these food standards and their ability to be increased in terms of community sustainable development. Some considerations about issues connected to tourism, the environment, and also the concretization of practices, also connected to some areas that need to be checked. In touristically speaking, we're talking about personal memories, personal feelings, tastes, of course, and through cultural and social uh, culinary practices. These all show that food feeds the tourists, as it were, with the idea of consuming traditional foods um, and eating exotic foods. Tourists end up seeking an experience by contacting local people, and food is one of the most accessible ways to contact and feel local culture. especially to be served with food, served by and food by the local inhabitants. The visitors are able to socialize, although ephemerally, with the locals, and this can create memories and perpetuate their tourist experiences. As we have said, traditionally, we have an association with certain specific foods. We, those responsible for tourist units, have disseminated these practices, and this is very much appreciated by visitors. Thus, in terms of tourism, what we find is that there is this demand, there is this connection. However, I'd like to open up a window here about the risk in terms of the image of the authenticity, which I'll talk about. Sometimes we see that food, depending on how it's approached, can be demonized, if you will. Manual autochthonous production can be sort of seen with certain suspicion. There is some expression in tourist consumption spaces nowadays. The older cooks associated to agricultural traditional times, also fish foods, this is all becoming more appropriate and recreated by conceptual cuisine. We have examples here, such as these foods, cornbread, miga, the cooked roasted corn. This food is becoming more and more emblematic, if you will. Out of these examples that are part of these emblematic processes, while tourists seek tradition, some structure and city halls launch programs, campaigns, and competitions for marketing in order to show their different foods, disseminate the idea. So, food is one of the cultural aspects which is more economically taken advantage of in the good sense. When we talk about cultural aspect, hybridization, as spoken before, sometimes they show these realities which can show us in false images of authenticity and local cultures where we create discourses with a reinvented culture which do not correspond to reality, and sometimes dignity of their practitioners is left aside. A participatory process is very essential, very important. Tourism, also seeking immobilization and authenticity, seek to crystallize and demystify the image of the Mediterranean diet. Then we move on to, we also associate this to the other different foods. There are some costs associated to sustainable development, which has become very important, which can be limiting. Recently, there are many products and practices which are mentioned in the rotational food, as it were. There are many different types of food. Here in the 60s, we found two North American investigators defended that This food standard has been favorable in the prevention of heart diseases. Legumes, vegetables, olive oil are very beneficial for this. What is happening now in Portugal, and many people are working on the issues about the food wheel, as it were, and the Mediterranean diet. In many schools, the eating correctly has been obviously stimulated, and this just shows the importance of people's participation, community people's participation in these processes. Also highlighted were the gaps vis-a-vis practices connected to the Mediterranean diet, as is happening in some um, areas of the country. There was an abuse of pesticides in some cases. Some autochthonous species were looked at sometimes suspiciously if they involved a lot of pesticides. Prices, of course, went up because of the unique view of some products. We had to, these are just a few of the gaps that are somehow making access difficult to certain social echelons. So moving on to my last idea, I have little time, I think, don't I? Transnational practices and identity configurations. Within my PhD investigation, which was in France and Portugal, the reflections in there was always a relationship with rural areas. This is just a map to illustrate the areas studied. This is an image of a long time ago where these immigrants depended on working in the fields, and essentially their knowledge came from the countryside. With the immigration to France, we're talking people from the center of Portugal. Those were the ones involved in this study, mainly men who migrated to France during the Second World War to work there. These are a few images of houses connected to agricultural practices. Also, the houses were also used as warehouses for agricultural products. Also these pictures from Portuguese immigrants in the 1950s and 60s who went to France and also contributed towards civil construction. They, as they worked in exposed areas, sometimes they had to stop working and going back to their home villages to return to working on agriculture, on farming. In the 70s and 1980s, this relationship cooled off, and then based on the creation of small vegetable patches in their areas in France, there were many products which were, I'm sorry, her microphone is quite far from her. It's difficult to catch everything she's saying. I do apologize. Markets in these regions in France, where there were many Portuguese immigrants, started to have more and more Portuguese projects which were brought from Portuguese companies, and the Portuguese populations there stocked up on them. So transnationalism, this food transportation and of many products, vegetables, etc., those were always present in this area of France, in the population, in these the immigrant Portuguese immigrant populations. The following generations, which has continued to feed these practices, but more and more, this is has to do with has contributed to eating habits in France, and the French Portuguese, so to speak, are very, very much incorporated into cultural habits of the country, imported from Portugal. It's almost been given a title now. The post-rural houses, they have lost their agricultural identity, and they are now just spaces for rest and work. More technology is more and more involved, and virtual mobility as well. The families involved also work a lot here. All the houses have been converted into more modern houses. Some are still have small vegetable patches or acquire products associated to the Mediterranean diet, seeking to resume the identity of those days, while still affording a cosmopolitan aspect. This is for people who live in and not and outside the countryside. So we have to look to the present and to the future, and remember the past, obviously, but in Arante's words, we have to take cultural heritage. It cannot be seen as a simple transmission of knowledge and practices from one generation to the next. This transformation implies choices and the transformation of knowledge, which is never neutral. So we have social structure. This product is more or less increased, if you will. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna, for sharing with us your reflections. And now we move on to our last speaker, Gabriela. Gabriela Pieroni is a historian, master's degree in cultural heritage preservation in the National Artistic and Historical Culture Institute, IFAN, PhD student in culture and heritage management at the University of Barcelona. Her investigations involve cultural policies, preservation of immaterial and food heritage, food security and sovereignty, and as well as nutritional in Brazil, and traditional agro-food practices. She's currently the director of the Slow Food Association Brazil and an activist in the Slow Food Brazil network. She has experience in devising participatory inventories in traditional food producing communities, as well as in patrimonial education and food education and social mobilization for the recognition and safeguarding of agro-food heritage. Good morning, all everyone. Almost good afternoon. Our friends in Mexico are a bit earlier, right? I'd like to initially thank Monica for the invitation and congratulate you for the initiative on devising this roundtable. I like the proposal for all the themes for this roundtable. I thought initially when I saw them, I'm going to learn a lot and advance a lot in the reflection of my PhD research. I thought, now I'm sure, having listened to everyone speaking, a lot of stuff came into mind. So, if you will. So I like to talk and I don't have much time, but I'll do my best. When I saw the proposal, I thought it would be a good idea to present, to show you one of our processes. It's a methodology which is under adaptation based on the inspiration given by the participatory um, projects by IFAN, my institute. This was launched in 2016, the publication of the participatory inventory publication. I'm going to contextualize how we have taken over this tool and how we have built and adapted a methodology focused on food culture in communities and food producing communities through a movement which I take part in, which is the slow food movement. It's international. It was born in the 1980s in Italy, and it depends fair, clean, good food. In Brazil, for 20 years, we have been working on this, and for 12 years, we have a civil society organization representing this movement here. It's the Low Food Brazil Association, of which I'm the director at the moment. And we executed through the financing of partnerships such as FIBA, Agricultural Development Foundation. I'm going to go back a bit in time just to give you a context of how we started working with this methodology. This exactly where I am. I reached the state of Santa Catarina this week. Here we have a flour mill behind me. I have been working with food and agricultural heritage in with the workers of this sector since 2010, when we through the live culture program by the Culture Points Network, which was a cultural policy which was emblematic in Brazil. We hope it will come back next year, who knows, to be included in the policy of Culture Points. This opened up the possibility of our starting to think of food culture within territories, within cultural policies, which are developing in Brazil, this promotion of food culture as a culture segment. And we created a flour mill culture point, gathering families of this sector, which had many traditions in this area of the Santa Catarina coast in southern Brazil. With this experience, we started to map out something which I wanted to talk to you about, talking to the speech made by many of my colleagues, especially Tihui from Mexico and our colleague who talked to us about Loreto, is your name, right? When Loreto's presentation. I really liked your presentation. Our experience is also based on seeking liaisons among governments, civil society organizations, bringing up this situation, this issue about the cities. The municipal powers are the main entities with whom we try to work. Also, private organizations such as all this inclusion of food heritage related to education, health, tourism, all these interconnections that we saw in the work of our two colleagues. This we have a lot here in these cases, which I will present. In Santa Catarina, we also started to map out the vulnerabilities suffered by the communities, observing that cultural heritage could serve, just as Sonia said, also when she mentioned Jane Smith, it's a tool for struggle. It's a tool of achieving and winning your rights, a safeguard of this heritage in these territories that suffer pressure. So the participatory inventory in the flour mills between 2016 and 2019, they were born to be a social mobilization tool and at the same time contribute towards the process of in order to devise a product, if you will, of doing and knowing. In the last few years, through financing by a project which is called Territory and Food Culture in the state of Ceará, we were able to develop two more inventories, all still within the development of this new methodology, which is to think about constructing knowledge horizontally based on the guardians of this heritage at a local level and have them provide their own narrative for a live dynamic heritage aspect and talk about the construction of this cultural narrative. So I will now share with you so we can browse through this together. Let's start off with Barra do Mundau, which is a territory in the state of Ceará, the west of Ceará, which is in northeastern Brazil. Yeah, I'm going to open it afterwards, right, as you said. This work was done during the pandemic, very challenges in an indigenous community. Can you see? Can you see it yet? No, Gabi, not yet. I think you have to double click it. Right, they're just sharing some technical knowledge.
Dei 2 cliques.
O arquivo está aparecendo para você? Porque para nós não
Ele
está.
aparece para mim.
Ah, é? Então,
Yes, Gabi says she can see it, but we can't see it. So share your screen. Then change to your presentation.
Agora sim, agora apareceu, Gabi.
Apareceu?
Sim.
Tá bom.
Right, we can see it now. Well, then, as I was saying, we're going to browse the inventory here together because it's very illustrative. So these were the organizations that financed this program: Slow Food Organization, as well as the Viçosa University. This territory is in Western Ceará state. We worked with this community during the whole of last year, supporting the work they had already been doing. Very active youth in working on their food heritage. Indigenous culture presence was strong due to the presence of these communities there. I want to show you a few pictures. Those are our inventory holders, a group of youths. I was really moved at such a difficult moment that we went through during the pandemic to work with such active youths who really owned their heritage, their beauty, the beauty of their territory. It was to me very enriching to be mediating this process. So here we have these youths between 15 and 40 years of age comprising the team. I formed the team. That's where Itapipoca is located, northern Brazil. Some of their products: Pachicutá, a local sacred fruit used for cure; Murici, also a fruit; animal raising. myself and my colleagues learned a lot and evolved our methodology by working with these people. Using the methodology, there's the IFAN Institute in the hands of the youth there, to think about this openly, where communities can take ownership of their heritage. We show them this, but very quickly they become the most enabled people to be talking about this heritage, because it's not just about affording them a voice, giving a voice to these communities, these holders, as a form of giving, of letting those who are responsible for maintaining this heritage speak, but also we are enabling them because they are the ones who are most capable to reflect this heritage today based on their own demands. So it was very interesting to share this methodology with them and receive and be given back a way to think and organize this knowledge and reflecting. This was all very rich from a concept point of view. To me, as a member of academia, I learned a lot. So at our meetings, at our gatherings, we try to build the methodology together. I took very little that was ready as a tool to work with them. The division of public policies vis-a-vis immaterial heritage, forms of expression, that kind of thing. We were, I brought the Brazilian immaterial public heritage language to them. We talked about the problems, and then they talked to us about their problems, or solutions, about the division of the categories vis-a-vis what is used by the IFAN public policies. So we reached eventually, we had a lot of, we experienced a lot of, we had many experiences there in the mangroves, the farming, how the food comes from the mangroves, the fish, the river, to the dish, to waste management as well. If you think of urban agriculture, organic waste, this is all within what we call food heritage. So this is very rich to think about as a tool. So we worked on social mapping. We built social mapping. They liked a lot. They enjoyed that, doing that a lot. Here we have a narrative on the territory written by them. So the challenge was, when we got there, I thought wasn't thinking of doing this, but then we thought, why don't they write the texts themselves? So they wrote the text, the indigenous groups. We broke, we divide ourselves into theme groups. Some leadership groups were there to explain the historical process and territorial process. And here we reach the categories that which IFAM policy works on, which we adapted based on suggestions made by the indigenous peoples themselves about how to work on bioculture and food heritage, as you from Latin America also work, those who work with food, the ways to cultivate, agriculture, extraction, fishing methods in the sea, in mangroves, in swamps, the way to raise animals, the way to cure, thinking of food as a cure or cure as a form of food. We weren't thinking of this, but the indigenous peoples suggested this because for them, medicinal plants are totally connected to their food heritage and the way to prepare foods, gastronomic heritage, cooking, cuisine, if you will. You can see that the youths broke broke up or subdivided themselves, and I sought to, I tried to suggest to them that everything that we work in terms of heritage, that heritage is live and dynamic. The idea of cultural hybridism, all these are concepts already mentioned by my colleagues before me, also working with indigenous peoples, with communities to take into account the influences they had over time, their culture as living culture, and especially as necessary today for the future. We reflected a lot on all this, about what has changed, authenticity, to question the idea of authenticity vis-a-vis heritage. This was very important to talk about with them because they, as indigenous peoples, this is very much alive to them. And this is changing as daily routines change for everyone, for them too. I'm just showing you here very quickly, but please, you must study the publication, read it. This publication took a long time to make. It's not the same thing, obviously, to register this in a book. Heritage development is still very much alive. This document, this book, also will contribute greatly to territorial guarantees. They do not have their land marked out, and they support each other in order to justify their presence on land. They use these treasures of their food heritage. These peoples work a lot on having their knowledge connected to food, agriculture, and fishing recognized. So we were happy to contribute. This is the methods of fishing. We mapped this out, the materials used, material culture involved, the artifacts used in agriculture, in fishing, the relationship to the areas, an emotional connection. We also collected stories and memories connected to rivers, mangroves, lakes, lagoons, streams, the sea, where everyone has their own challenges, vulnerable aspects also incorporated towards building this cultural narrative. Sorry, I'm having to show like this so quickly. I really wanted to show you the divisions of the categories. We have the animal breeding, animal raising methods, as I said before, the relationship with these animals, raising them as family members. Very interesting to see all the knowledge involved. Animals' reproduction habits or traditions, if you will. This was all very strong and very moving for me because we had to um, kill many animals during the whole visit. It was very strong for me to see this process with youths. We had workshops where the young people uh, learning with their elderly how to slaughter um, bulls, pigs, chicken, and so there is a whole relationship there between man and nature vis-a-vis survival, food, safety, and sovereignty. It was very interesting to work on this with them. The cure modes, these this people is very traditional, very knowledgeable, and very well known for their knowledge of um, medicinal aspects of plant, food that cures. We have they call the syrups and mixtures they make. We had workshops to convey this knowledge, also reflecting with regard to what is changing over time and the needs of tomorrow. Oils, teas, to get to think about the subdivisions of all this with the indigenous peoples was very enriching and difficult because they have other divisions different from we Westerners. Actually, they try not to split things too much. And within our methodology, we have a lot of silos, categories, right? You that work with food all know how difficult it is to work with silos and boxes when we're talking about food. We're talking about lots of things we approach here today: territory, health, identity, tourism, education, spirituality, and so on. And thinking of all these connections with them, a very politically organized people, we also thought about safeguarding this inventory, how important it will be to think about an action plan, which we developed after the inventory, an action plan to think about safeguarding. So the inventory, as Ifan thinks, the identification tool, but also seeing the inventory as a safeguarding tool. Because if it's an inventory built in a participatory way with these detainers protagonizing its writing, there will definitely be solutions for vulnerabilities that these assets at risk run today. So we are building an, a short, medium, and long term plan, implying in choosing our partners, indigenous groups, groups, youth, women, also with governments. Sorry, I didn't see that my time was up. How much time do I have?
Já terminou o seu
No,
tempo.
your time has finished. Sorry.
Para Já aproveito para pedir para você colocar o link das publicações no
I
chat.
can ask, I take the opportunity now to publish the link to your work, okay? The last category, which is cooking, the way of preparing food, Tremembe people had great participation. We have many recipes published here. There is a section which is almost a recipe book, a cookbook, and they are divided as per the divisions made by the indigenous groups: flour, food for cure, sea food, food coming from the mangroves, crab. That's it, everyone. Sorry, I went over my time. My chat room wasn't open. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Obrigada, Gabriela. Desculpa, né?
Thank you, Gabriela. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because of time constraints, I'd like to thank you very much. I know Gabriela's work. She will show us, she will convey to us her work, both from Santa Catarina State and the ones in the state of Ceará. Well, everyone, I think we will not be able to move on here. So to wrap up today's meeting, I think it would be very important for us to have our final considerations based on a question. I think you have all brought with you essential issues to think about: heritage, heritage aspects relating to cuisine. Juliana talked about the culturally about food. Heritage is dynamic, subject to spatial divisions and everything that happens in a town's life. Loreto mentioned the importance of joining the state, civil society, and communities, thinking of local development strategies with communities, taking care towards working with tourism in order for tourism not to be so damaging, which it can be. So the patrimonialization, quote unquote, is very important. Chihui talked about curing a city, showing indigenous complex knowledge, as well as those from Afro-descendant people, the dangers of food racism. She also talked about the problems of the insertion within World Heritage. So I'd like your comments on that. Actually, the danger of leading to homogenization of practices. Also, the Mediterranean diet brought by Anna talked about UNESCO bringing up the cultural and patrimonial importance of the Mediterranean diet. Also, the importance of taking into account social and local context. We talk about price increase based on the insertion in world heritage. Gabi also mentioned the uh, patrimonialization to be used as well, using heritage as a resource to face the dangers of homogenizing processes such as agribusiness in the case of Santa Catarina state. So heritage processes at a national level or recognition by UNESCO, they can be opportunities and also great challenges because it's complicated, right? You should not make them so iconic. So I'd like each one of you to comment on these opportunities and challenges by the patrimonialization and bid farewell after in your short goodbyes. So starting with Juliana.
Só quanto tempo, por favor?
How long?
Rapidinho, né? Nem
Yeah, very
2
quickly.
meses.
Yeah, very brief, please. 2, 3 minutes. Just a kind of a goodbye, a quick comment. Just a small, slight provocation. So thanks again very much. It was a pleasure to take part here at this table, to hear about from these experiences by other colleagues. Very interesting experiences we would not have heard about if it were not for this table today, a unique opportunity. And I think that with regard to my theme, I think it's very clear the more I talk to people who research in this area, the hybridism process is very clear in foods. I see this as a manifestation where we observe more, the most clarity. It has many challenges, and the challenges brought by our colleagues. Food racism, I found very interesting as a concept, showed by Tihui. And it was all very interested. It was an honor for me to take part here today. Thank you to all those who watched us and the organizers. Congratulations to my colleague for your presentation. It was an honor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juliana. Loreto, please, you have the floor.
Sí, nuevamente, como decía Juliana, ¿no? Agradecer
Well, as Juliana said, I'd like to thank you for the invitation and the exchange of experiences we had here. And with regard to your question, Sonia, we in Chile, I believe in other countries that we work in as well, in this declaration of the World Heritage Site, as it were, the patrimonialization, quote unquote, is an interesting concept. Very complex. This declaration was produced, and in communities we worked with, we said that it's necessary to depatrimonialize heritage. That's what I can share with you, which is to continue working very daily practices. And there is a deep legacy here left us and that we can leave, historical, and the way we live, much more sustainable than what we do today in the contemporary world. Thanks very much. Thank you, Loreto. Tihui, please. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation. I love to see how in each territory in Latin America there is a trench which seeks horizontally to improve heritage. I would just like to say that although we have the knowledge, the practices, and the tools, the discussions continue in dispute, and the heritization, patrimonialization, quote unquote, as Lorena said, well, it's in the hands of us all here, be it those who live in urban centers, countryside. It's in the hand of horizontal strategies. The lesson is left. If we want to build and take this idea forward with a dignified life for everyone through political struggle, and everything must be done to benefit all, of course. Thank you, Tihui. Anna. Yes, everyone has said what I wanted to say. Patrimonialization is a political act. Those who are working in the patrimonialization processes are working with those who are most interested, those who practice it. There is hierarchy and authority involved. Patrimonialization, I think it must, we must also focus on the main actors, which are the practitioners. Thank you all very much. It was great to be here. And I'll see you soon, hopefully. Thank you, Anna. Gabi, your considerations, please, your remarks. Yeah, thank you very much, the organizers. This was a great initiative. It's important that we join together those who work with these such essential themes for the world today. We must continue to exchange and thank the organizers of the event, and hopefully we will meet again in new opportunities. That's, yeah, thank you. That's what I had to say. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity of mediating this debate. I learned with each of you an all-female table. I heard the sensitive aspect from each one. Monica, you have the floor. Monica, yes, thank you, Sonia. I'd like to thank you very much for your moderation, brilliant moderation of this table. Thank you very much to our speakers with their instigation, inspiring speeches, the translation, and the um, communication teams, our listeners here with us. I'd like to thank you all very much and inform you that we're going to have a meeting which will be on the 19th of October next month, which will deal with cities, relationships between cities, heritage, and housing. That's what I had to say. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much indeed. You all very much. It was very important to hear you all. I'd like to leave you a challenge. We had a peak of 85 people. Now we have 52. So I do believe that we have a considerable amount of interested parties. So we need to create connections. It's great to be here, right, in this bubble of ours, listening to our colleagues from Chile, Mexico, Brazil, Portugal. But we must go beyond this line, this border, which was kind of vertical. We have people who are interested in the subject. I like to listen to Gabi talk about her work, also our colleague from Chile, about these crossings with society. I believe we have a great challenge, Monica, for these 3 moments we're going to promote here. We had over 100 people combined with the first one. I think we can really create real connection. The internet is very helpful to us in this aspect. Juliana, Tui, Ana, Gabi, Tui, and all those who spoke, we must make things stronger. You know, it's not, we did the speech very nice and then we'll meet again later. No, we must create here a practice here for future work on these aspects. Thank you, Monica. And there's the challenge. No, your microphone is on. Yes, we can hear you. Great that you touched on this. The fact of the idea of continuing with transnational dialogues is exactly to strengthen this transverse aspect among the Southern Hemisphere, many nations in the Southern Hemisphere, not just touching on Latin America. Of course, we have a lot of interest here, but also focus on opening up to other connections, opening up to new dialogues, and for us to follow our route beautifully as we have done.